On the first day of Christmas, I gained my Stuart King. Hello and welcome back to That Aged Well. And as you may have guessed from the title of this episode, we are going to discuss a very Stuart Christmas. Not Stuart Little, to be confused with the movie, but I'm of course joined by Andrea Zuvich, who has written Revenue, A Life of Barbara Villiers, and Charles II's most infamous mistress. And this week, of course, we're doing this. You also host Stuart Saturday on Twitter or X, whatever you prefer to call it these days. And we should absolutely should check out. And of course, like I said, this week we're going to discuss Stuart Christmas. And as the title may indicate, it would last for 12 days and even more sometimes. And I want to begin by asking: Is this tradition coming from Scottish branch of the family, Stuart family, or was this a new thing when they inherited the throne from Elizabeth I when James I came in? Was this going to be a new tradition, or was it already an established tradition in the Stuart family?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yes, you'll find that it was a continuation of traditions that were already in place. There wasn't a great deal of change between that which was present at the Tudor courts and that which you would find at the Stuart courts. And when we talk about the Stuart period, of course, we would probably be mentioning the Stuarts, who were the royal family from the 14th century on in Scotland. But for the purposes of my work, I tend to focus on the Stuarts who were from 1603, which was when King James VI of Scotland took over the English throne following the death of Queen Elizabeth I. And so I tend to focus my work on 1603 to 1714, which was the reign of Queen Anne. So that's to set your listeners on what we're going to be talking about.
So this 12 days is quite a lot of days to celebrate Christmas. I mean, usually in modern age, and I know you don't can't talk too much about this, but I want to ask anyway. Was this quite common in European courts at the time, having a 12-day or more Christmas celebration at the court, and generally because this was also not just for the nobles, I believe, but it was enjoyed by both peasants and royalty alike.
Yes, certainly. The everyday person in Stuart Britain would have celebrated 12 days of Christmas. And so you would have something from Christmas to 12th night. So that would be 12 days of Christmas. And the thing is, it's different. I'm not exactly sure what some courts did throughout different parts of Europe, but for the Stuart period, sometimes there would be celebrations quite early, and then that would last until February. So a great long period, so much longer than 12 days.
And we have a saying that here in Norway that it's Christmas lasts until Easter, but I guess that's really true in the Stuart case.
Yeah, well, it depends on who you were talking to, if they were, courtier or whatnot. But for the most part, it was 12 days. Yes. And yeah, sorry.
No, yeah, go on. Yeah, sorry.
So for this festive time, people would they would decorate their houses with greenery. So they would get ideally holly or ivy, and they would use these to decorate their houses. And it would be quite a beautiful festive thing. I mean, this was before the Christmas tree, which became popular in the Victorian period. So, and so they had a different sort of feel to the Christmas decorations, which was more similar, I think, to the Tudor decorations for this period.
Now, in modern, or I don't know how far way back this goes, but we have, of course, have Advent times here in there was in modern times where we start with
Yeah.
these Christmas calendars, etc., and we start building up the Christmas decorations already on December 1st.
Hmm.
And was this when did the Stuart Christmas period? Did it start before? Was Advent a thing in Stuart times as well, or what? When did people start putting up these Christmas decorations? Was this right before Christmas, or did it start early in December, as we kind of some of people do today? As some people already did get the Christmas tree in today on December 1st when this episode is recorded. So, how
Right.
early did the celebration start?
I think it was a very personal choice. So I think most people would have done it in December. But at court, there might have been some festivities leading up to that in November, that sort of thing. But you're right. This is the first day of Advent, and I started my 17th century lady Advent calendar, so people can see that on X and Facebook. And there are so many beautiful objects from the Stuart period, which I like to highlight at this time of the year. So it's like I don't know if you have this in Norway, but my daughter has an advent calendar with chocolates inside, and so so we I like to do a sort of Stuart era version where we show lots of nice objects from the period, from art and objects. Today was a lovely dress, the silver tissue dress from the 1660s, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful to have a chance to show this, and uh, and everyone can appreciate something lovely from that time period. Um,
So,
yeah.
was there that Christmas balls or Christmas drinks that were associated with this period as well, that were especially for December, or in the Christmas period?
Oh yes. There were specific drinks. But people did enjoy, in general, some wines, um, and there were there's some things that are mentioned in in the diaries of people like John Evelyn and Samuel Pepys, who were very important writers at the time, and they drank things such as claret, and that was very popular at the time, and sack. Um, there would be possets that were made, and I know lots of people in this country, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere, perhaps they like to cook a turkey for the time. And turkeys had been brought to the UK in the mid 16th century, but during the 17th century, they really hadn't taken off so much at that time for the main meal. They favored goose and meat pies. Something that's popularly talked about is minced pies from the Stuart period. The minced pies you get at the supermarkets today are very sweet, and they are not what you would have found at the Stuart period, which were made with meat. So it was a very different flavor. And I've never made one myself, but they seem very interesting. So definitely had meat in them. Um, and something else that they liked was a plum pudding, which was a bit different to what the Victorians ended up making, and it wasn't so much in a bowl cooked, but it was almost like porridge in a sort of bowl, and that would have been made. And the wealthier a person was, the more likely they would be to be able to purchase exotic spices such as nutmeg, cloves, mace, cinnamon, and raisins. I mean, there are some grapes that are made in the UK, but they're not as great as ones in France and Italy and that such, because of the climate. Um, and so you'd get these imported into the country, and of course the more impoverished were not able to purchase these. There is an amazing book called, I think it's Nathaniel's Nutmeg, and it describes how dangerous and expensive it was to obtain nutmeg because it came from far off on the other side of the world. And so it was a very highly prized spice. So yes, so wealthier people were able to enhance their festive foods with these costly ingredients. Um, and so that's something to think about. We think about how the Stuarts had lots of greenery in their houses, and they had these lovely foods that they enjoyed.
Was eggnog a thing back then, or is that more a recent thing that people like to drink for Christmas?
The drinks they would
Yeah,
yeah they
eggnog. Was eggnog a
uh
thing back then, or is
I
that more
don't
recent?
believe egg. I think they did have drinks with eggs mixed in. That was sometimes put in things like possets, but um, eggnog is more of a. I believe it's a later creation. I quite like it, but they don't sell it here. um, I grew up in the United States, and eggnog is very very popular there. But I've been here for almost 17 years, and I can't buy it. So
Now, of course, games were as well part of the 12-day Christmas celebration.
mhm.
So, what kind of games do you find in the Stuart periods? And again, was there a mixture of nobles and peasants alike that played these games, or was there separation from the peasants, or was it kind of enjoyed? Was there a stricter sense there?
Well, I think some things were universally enjoyed. Um, so some people who were more comfortable being indoors would perhaps play cards. There were all sorts of different games that were played in the Stuart period with cards. Um, but those who perhaps were more adventurous and liked, to have a bit of exercise would have gone hunting, and that was something that was quite popular. Hunting, and the wealthier would perhaps have gone hunting and done some hawking, birds of prey, that sort of thing. It was fun for many people. Um, and customs throughout the Stuart period, but there are exceptions, and I will talk to you about the exception later. Um, there were these traditions of giving money to servants. Um, there were carol singing. So there are lots of songs that are still around from that time. And people would play music. They would dance. There were lots of dancing, and there was lots of dancing. And other forms of merriment would have been present at this time. And so also, people were giving generously where they could. They would give gifts of food and drink to friends and family, neighbors. So it was a time of great community and generosity.
What about the balls, like Christmas balls? Was that a thing that were as well as a part of the celebration?
Yeah, with some people, yes, the aristocrats, there were royal balls, and there would be some. Usually around New Year's, there would be a sort of New Year's ball. Um, and Samuel Pepys, the diarist I referred to earlier, he did mention uh, there were balls, and the king and queen were present, and the courtiers, and everyone you can name of, everyone you can think of, who was influential in the Stuart courts, um, would have been involved in this sort of thing.
What about the church and the church taking part in these festivities? So how the church involved in the Christmas celebrations?
Well, there is quite a lot of lots to do with the church. And in order to really understand that, you have to see the context of the period. And when Elizabeth I died in 1603, she had a kingdom that was still divided. There were previously the country was Catholic, but of course under her father and her brother, and there were so many changes, and there was the dissolution of the monasteries and everything. And yet many had converted to Protestantism.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you. Many had converted to Protestantism, and the Church of England was the Anglican Church. And there were lots of splintering groups from that incident. And so there was a lot of turmoil, religious turmoil and political turmoil in the 17th century as a result of all these beliefs becoming fractured and splintering off into different sort of denominations. And something we really need to think about when we talk about the Stuart period and Christmas is what happened as a result of the civil wars. Now, there were 3 civil wars, and sometimes they're called the English Civil Wars, sometimes the British Civil Wars. So ultimately, the royalists who supported King Charles I were defeated. And as a result, those who came into power were quite religiously zealous and Puritan. And in 1647, Parliament, and not Oliver Cromwell, passed an ordinance that led to a total prohibition of Christmas celebrations. So, so when you look at the time before the wars, people did love Christmas and they celebrated it. And then you had this period of terrible bloodshed and enmity and warfare. And that's when, and during this chaos, finally the Puritans, these quite hardcore zealots, took control. And what resulted was having this notorious banning of feasting and merriment at Christmas. And in churches, anything considered remotely idolatrous, such as pictures, ornate clerical vestments, and even organs, were prohibited. So there's a funny thing that I remember from a TV series. I think it's from 2008, and it was The Devil's Whore. And that had quite a young Michael Fassbender playing Rainsborough, one of these very important parliamentarians from the Civil War period. And he said something to the effect of, you blaspheme when you give Jesus a birthday party. And I thought that was quite striking, that does encapsulate what some people thought at the time. So they thought it was completely wrong to celebrate Christmas. So there are a few myths associated with Christmas during the Stuart period, specifically the period between 1645, 1660. And Charles I was executed in the winter of 1649. And the most popular of these myths is undoubtedly that Oliver Cromwell personally banned Christmas. This wasn't true, like I mentioned earlier, and it was in fact something done by Parliament with an ordinance. And so any public celebration of Christmas was prohibited. But that said, I had a show. I'm sorry. I had Stuart Orme on my show last month. It's Stuart Saturday Live. And he suggested that would have been very difficult to clamp down upon. And I think that's true. People would have still celebrated in the privacy of
I
their
was
own
going
homes.
to ask, did people celebrate anyway, even if Christmas was banned? And was there a penalty if you were caught celebrating Christmas, or did they like, let me just do the thing?
Yes, well, there was some people were arrested. I think John Evelyn wrote about this in his diary that he attended an illegal service. So he attended this, and they were all surrounded by soldiers, and were, I think they were arrested, but then released. So it was a serious thing to even attend services or do anything to celebrate that. Things really seemed to kick off at one point. Some people were really upset about this, of course, because lots of people love Christmas, and it's a lovely time of the year, and it's a major holiday, and they were quite angry at being stopped from celebrating this holiday. And there were some riots that took place, and it was against this. But ultimately, things were clamped down upon. So it was a very difficult time for
When were the
people.
ban lifted? Was it after Cromwell's Republic, or was it later on when were the Christmas reinstated again?
Well, Christmas was reinstated following the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, when Charles II was restored to his throne. And he overthrew many of these laws that had been put in place during the interregnum. And it's quite striking how much he had changed when he came back into power.
So, how did Christmas celebrations change after the ban and the return of Charles II to power in England?
Well, by the end of the interregnum, it was very unpopular, this idea of not celebrating Christmas. People loved their feasts. They wanted to keep doing that. And there was this amazing pamphlet. It was called The Vindication of Christmas, and I think it was published in 1653. And it shows three men. There was a very fancy, wealthy man on the left from the city, a city dweller, and in the middle was Father Christmas, who is in effect the equivalent of Santa Claus for some cultures. And finally, a countryman. So the wealthy upper class man says to Father Christmas, "Keep out, you come not here." To which Father Christmas replies, "Oh, sir, I bring good cheer." And the country guy on the right, he supports Father Christmas, and he backs him up by saying, "Old Christmas welcome, do not fear." And I thought this was a perfect example of the general feeling of the populace at this time. So the Puritans were too extreme for most people, and accordingly, the harsh new laws simply were not popular with the majority of the population. And Christmas, in particular, was looked upon by the Puritan government as a sign of the people's continued superstition, their superstitious nature. In other words, the government was completely out of touch with reality and what the
So nothing
majority of
changed
people.
since the 17th century.
No. So the elite people did not understand what the general population wanted. Most of the people wanted their feast day.
And again, I got to
Yeah.
ask about the church as well. Were the church still opposed to celebrating Christmas, or were they kind of keen to reinstate these festivities again? Or did they look at it still as a blasphemous that it wanted to be
No,
abolished?
no. When Charles II came back, it was a regular holiday again for them, and they had Christmas sermons and everything. and it was very different. So you see, that period with the Puritans was a sort of blip. It was very, very different from
Mm.
what came before and after it.
So, like I said earlier, again, was it still 12 days of Christmas celebration, or was it kind of toned down upon it? Did they even have a longer Christmas celebration when Christmas came back and under Charles II's rule?
Charles II had one of the long ones. He had celebrations for quite a long time, up until
I
February
mean, to be fair, they had a
sometime.
lot to catch up on.
Yes, I think so. But he does have this reputation of being this merry monarch, and to a certain extent, that's true. But he certainly brought back lots of things, um, and generally a lot of feasting and merriment and all sorts of things. It a very interesting time period. Now, uh, Twelfth Night was usually when things ended. And that's not just the title of a play by William Shakespeare. Of course, Shakespeare lived until 1616, so he was definitely part of the Stuart Britain. And I like to always emphasize that, because people only associate him with the Tudor period. So
Where the Christmas plays, like you mentioned Shakespeare, but where there's plays, nativity plays associated with Christmas, as you know, that were specifically written for this period.
I haven't come across nativity plays in particular from this time. Uh, I have not come across it, so perhaps others in the course of their research have found something, but I have not. So
I gotta ask, how do you celebrate Christmas until February or March? How did that work? Because
uh,
you have all the like you said in the 12 days you have all these games, festivities going on, but
yes,
even people must get a little bit worn out by celebrating all the way until February. So how did
yeah,
where this how did the celebration go on from January until February as well?
yeah. That's a very good question, and I'm not quite sure, because it's not clearly talked about, and in some of these diaries that we use so often um, when we research period. But if I look about people now, there are some of the people in my acquaintance who do celebrate past 12th night and into February. So it's very personal. It's personal and perhaps cultural decision. So it's all very fascinating.
I want to go back a little bit to Charles first, if you don't mind, because because his wife Henrietta Maria, of course, was
Mhm.
a devout Catholic. So,
Yes.
and I believe Charles was a Protestant. So, how did these two different religions collide when it came to Christmas tradition? Were the Catholic Christmas kind of similar, so it didn't really matter at this point, or how? Would that affect the
Yeah.
Christmas celebration as well, being one being Catholic and one being Protestant?
Yes, it is an odd situation. However, Charles gave her a lot of scope to, have her own faith made in the way she wanted. She had, I believe, her own chapel and oratory, I believe. And he had his own beliefs, and she had hers, and they made it work. Because they were still ultimately both Christian, and so some fundamental things were the same. But it is an interesting situation. They did get on quite well. Not in the early days, of course,
Mm.
but especially after the assassination of the Duke of Buckingham, who was a bit of a third wheel in their relationship. Um, they
There
they
is
became
rumors
very.
that he had an affair with Henrietta Maria, I believe, isn't
Oh,
there?
Oh, I there are lots of rumors about Buckingham, but I don't really give them much credence, really. Um, I think that he was such a character that it's easy to just say that he was did this or that, but I think Henrietta Maria was a very loyal wife. She she's often depicted as a sort of scheming Lady Macbeth-like figure, when she was actually a very true spouse, very loyal. So,
So, what Christmas tradition?
mhm. Hmm. I think the things that are still relevant to our time are things like being with family and friends and feasting. These things have continued to our time. Um, and I think that that desire to decorate your home or your office or your church or what have you is something that the Stuarts and the people who inhabited these isles, they felt that too, and they wanted to do that as well. They wanted this convivial atmosphere, and it's something that's really important to humans and to people in general. They have their faith, they have this part of their culture, and it's all wrapped up together. And this is a very important holiday, and it's been so for hundreds of years. So it's interesting. Yeah, I love that. We don't really have any notion of a Christmas tree during the Stuart period. I do think that's a later addition. It's a lovely addition, and I have a Christmas tree in my house right now. I love it. But the Stuarts were really into having the greenery. So it was like the woodland coming into their homes. And it it had its own magical element, just like that. Yeah. Mhm. Well, well, they had Father Christmas here. That's the thing. That's the sort of character they really had. And yes, we see that in pamphlets of the time, Father Christmas. Gift giving was definitely something that people did if they could. Mainly, it was things that they would have made, food or drinks. Because most people, of course, would have made their own beer at home, and but they would have um, made all sorts of things, and it was the act of giving to another that was part of this this sense of Christmas. Um, but in my biography of Barbara Villiers, who was Charles II's most infamous mistress, she lasted a very long time. Um, she did a faux pas, and it was quite a big deal because she was very good at taking things. um, And Samuel Pepys quite liked her. He was a bit obsessed with her. And on one occasion he wrote, "My Lady Castlemaine hath all the king's Christmas presents made him by the peers given to her, which is a most abominable thing." So he was given, Charles II was given lots of costly gifts um, by some of the peers. And she went and took them all for herself. So that's something that we would look upon very badly today too. If somebody gave, for example, if someone gave me lots of nice gifts and then my husband took everything away, that wouldn't have been. That's not right. Yeah. Oh yes, they would have partaken of all the merriment and the feasting and the music and the different festivities. I mean, it all depends on the sovereign we're talking about. I mean, James I was really passionate about his hunting. He loved hunting. Charles II loved lots of things. He had a big joie de vivre, and so they're very different, but they had their interests, and they certainly enjoyed their Christmas. All of the Stuarts did have their Christmas time. Oh, well, they would have had all sorts of lovely dishes. They had a variety of foods, um, banquets, all sorts. And let me see. There's just lots of different variety of foods. I mean, they would have all these spices, and uh, at these massive banquets, they would have loads of courtiers and intricate, beautiful things like the salt of Exeter. If people can look this up, it's extraordinary. And it was presented to Charles II early in his reign. And it's a salt cellar with compartments for salt and for other condiments, and it's amazing. It's like gold with other precious jewels and everything. So if they could look it up, salt of Exeter. And there are some wonderful observations people made from the time of banquets and feasting and card games and balls and dancing and all sorts. So they knew how to have a good time. They did. Mhm. They probably were. They were always international ambassadors from foreign courts who would come. I mean, one of the most famous, perhaps, was Lorenzo Magalotti, and he was an Italian, and he wrote down lots of observations, and they're all very, very interesting. Yeah. Let me see. Let me see. Yes. So he visited in 1668. He was an Italian nobleman, and he lived from 1637 to 1712, and he had the privilege of interacting with many well-known Stuart era persons, and he noticed things with Charles II and his interactions with Barbara, his mistress, and it was and he saw that Charles was a bit bored with her, but I don't know exactly what he said about the festivities. He had a lot of very well-founded ideas based on what he saw at court. Very interesting person. But there were lots of foreign ambassadors, visitors who remarked about what they saw during their stay in Stuart Britain. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, if you're interested in Stuart history, perhaps you can come and see my website. I'm at www.17thcenturylady.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, which is where most of my audience is, and YouTube, Patreon, and also TikTok. I don't do too much on TikTok, but I'm still there.